Hi everybody, welcome to the Best is Leadership podcast, and our guest today is Caron Bradshaw OBE. This podcast is all about helping leaders learn from other leaders, people who have walked the path that you are walking. They've got some game-changing insights to share, unfiltered stories, and we're here for that. So a little bit about Caron as I make her introduction. She is a qualified barrister, and she's occupied a number of roles in leading institutions such as the Chartered Accountant of Accountants of England and Wales, and more recently as CEO of the Charity Finance Group. And she'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But if you go on her LinkedIn, 17 roles. So her experience is vast. She was awarded an OBE for services to the charitable sector, and a really good friend of our mutually describe her as inspirational in so many ways. And I have to agree, what's most striking about Caron, as you'll learn, is how human she is. She's passionate and driven and a really creative thinker. So Caron, thank you so much for making time to join us. Tell us a little bit about your experience and what you've been involved in.
My pleasure. So it depends on how far back you want me to go. Let's start with the barrister bit, because you mentioned the fact that I'm a non-practicing barrister. I was the first person in my family to go to university, actually. And I'd had this absolute passion that I wanted to be a barrister from, I don't know how, ever so young. Can't remember where it came from. Probably watching Rumpole of the Bailey or something like that. And I got to bar school, having failed my A-levels and had to resit them. So I went through a bit of a weird route. And halfway through the course thought, this is not the world I want to be in, which was terrifying. But it's probably the first thing that made me reconsider, actually, what do you do when you are faced with something that is a complete opposite to where you thought things were going to go? So I went to the Institute of Chartered Accountants really as a stopgap measure. And I spent 16 years there. The standing joke was I was going around the departments for a second time. But it was just, it's one of those fantastic places where I was able to try on completely different disciplines with no experience in a way that you perhaps wouldn't if you were applying for a job and saying, I think I can do this, but I don't have any experience. You're not likely to get your foot in the door. So I've had a really blessed career up to becoming the chief executive of the Charity Finance Group, a position that I held for 15 years. So
fantastic. So you've recently stepped down from that role, but I'd love to learn about what kept you there for 15 years and where that passion took you.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm still working for the CFG, so I still have the same passion and just gratitude for the place and the role. It's one of those organisations that really get under your skin. I mean, the charity sector particularly gets under your skin anyway. But I've really loved the work. I found it so challenging. It's one of those roles that, if you put down on paper what was a perfect role for me next after I'd been at the institute, it was all of those things, because it brought all of the pieces together. The membership, the policy, all the leadership, all that sort of creativity. And that's really what's kept me there for 15 years, plus a couple of things like the pandemic and the cost of living crisis kind of made it quite difficult to move on. When you've sunk that much of your heart and soul into an organisation, you need to be sure that you're leaving it in good hands. So a lengthy succession plan.
Fantastic. So why don't we kick off by exploring leadership? Because you've had such a vast array of roles. You're non-executive director, you've worked on charitable boards and so on, not least your other positions. So tell us what has driven your focus around leadership, and maybe think about what really matters to you when you're considering it.
People. In a word, people. I found very early on, when I was doing sort of supervisory type roles, that really it sounds arrogant to say sets you apart, but what I found really helpful and I felt really in flow when I was doing it was trying to understand the people that I was responsible for, and that sense of pride in their achievements when you were able to support them to find things that they perhaps didn't even see in themselves.
Yeah.
So that has been a consistent piece all the way through, right from supervisory roles up to being a CEO, has been thinking about the relationships with people, and watching things that didn't work well. So, the very transactional types of command and control leadership that I could see really wasn't getting the best out of people. It's almost like having parenting. You sort of, when you have your own kids, you take the best bits from what you've experienced, and you try to counterpoint the things that haven't been quite so successful.
Yeah. So in your most recent role, there's over 100 charities that you worked with and still work with. Is that right? In the
more
charity
than that,
group? Yeah. So
1,400.
More hundreds, exactly.
1,400,
so, 1,400, thank you. So I'm now thinking you must have had a brilliant helicopter view of where they, what you could see and what you could pinpoint as the pieces that made the biggest difference. So is there anything that stuck out to you or sticks out to you with that experience behind you about leadership, and particularly the things that other people listening might go, actually, that is something I've yet to consider or yet to develop?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you get from a role in infrastructure is that ability to see big, small, every type of subsector, and it does give you a real insight into the various ways that different people work. And certainly, I've been able to pull from that a whole bunch of different approaches. One of them is I saw so frequently leaders listening to reply, not listening to understand.
Interesting. Okay. And what about active listening? So tell me more around what you've pinpointed.
So I think particularly when we're leaders and we're trying our best all the time, let's face it, there's very few people that wake up in the morning and think, I know, today I'm going to screw up. They just don't. We're trying our best. And we don't always get it right. And we sometimes are blind to how something will land, and you can't please all the people all the time. So there's lots of different nuances to leadership that I think sometimes we think, well, if I do this, this is what's going to be the outcome, and it just so often isn't the case. And when we're having feedback in the moment, when we think, we've prided ourselves on thinking we've charted a way through some choppy waters, and what you're getting back is it might be in a velvet glove, but it's a fist in the face. It's very difficult to put down your ego and to really listen for what is there. The phrase I use with my team is looking for the diamonds in the dirt, because it's so easy to miss the gems because you're responding to all of the not very pleasant packaging. So trying to be able to sort of stand back and have empathy for why the person is responding to you in the way that they are, but also really actively listening for what it is that they're trying to say. That doesn't mean you give them a free pass to be unprofessional, unreasonable, inappropriate, but it does mean that you just give your ego a pause to sit back and say, although, ouch, that hurt, but actually, what are the really good things that this person is saying that I can use, not just for the benefit of the situation and them, but also for wider application.
Can you think of a situation when that served you personally well, that made such a big difference?
Loads. I mean, one example from the not so distant past, although it does feel like it's quite a long time ago now, was COVID, where we were very quickly in the charity sector. I don't know if you know much about the way that the furlough scheme worked, but it was quite difficult for charities to apply it. And they suddenly changed the rules and gave us a very small window that we could potentially, as an organisation, utilise furlough for the benefit of our bottom line and the sustainability of the organisation. And up to that point, we hadn't used furlough at all. So we made some decisions to select individuals to be furloughed for a period of time. Now, obviously, when you are selected for furlough in an organisation, you've got all of that sort of emotional concern, worry about whether or not you are being selected because this is a prelim to you being made redundant, or is the organisation, struggling, etc. And I remember very vividly one of my staff feeling really aggrieved by the fact that they'd been selected to be furloughed, rather than thinking about the function of the role. And it wasn't about that individual. It was about the function needing less boots on the ground. We could afford to sort of stand down some of that area. And the feedback that we got was very, very personal. It was very, why are you doing this? You haven't communicated it properly. It's happened too quickly. There was a lot of emotion around the feedback that we were being in receipt of. And so standing back and accepting that this is an emotional point in time. These are individuals that are equally going through the middle of a pandemic with all of the wider concerns and fear and all that uncertainty, enabled us to just have that great deal of empathy for the position. And what I ended up doing was having a personal conversation with the individual and just explaining how we'd got to where we'd got to, and very gently but firmly advising them that there are ways in which you can feed back that are not critical in a personal way, and not telling them off, but just sharing that when you do this next time, can I coach you into approaching it in this way rather than that way? Because I think for me, I'm not got thick skin, but I can allow an awful lot of things to ride over me because I'm listening to understand, not to reply. But in another organisation, and somebody's not always going to work for me or with me, in another organisation, you speak to the boss in the way that that person spoke to me, and you're probably going to be having your card marked or possibly disciplined in some way. So, that's one example that's in the not too distant past.
I think that's a great example, actually. And there's so many things that you've talked about there. You've talked about the listening, and empathy came up a few times. And I think, when we talk about empathy, we're talking about the fact that you can relate to somebody else's feelings. You don't have to live their feelings or sympathise and agree with everything they say, but you relate. And that is a big part of human connection. And that point, which was, and we'll help them for whatever their future holds as well. But furlough was a really tricky time, because I think there was people that felt like they were lucky to be furloughed or unlucky to be furloughed, and that was a deeply personal experience for many, many people. So thank you for sharing that. Anything else to add to that?
Well, I mean, the other example was a deeply personal one, which is at CFG. I had about probably 13 years ago now, what you would call a breakdown. A load of decisions that I took. Some of them were poor decisions. I didn't execute them particularly well. Some of them were circumstance that was beyond my control. And I had a personal sort of perfect storm where lots of different things came together. And in a nutshell, I lost the confidence of a number of people on my board. And some of them behaved in ways that were very, very personal. And I could see, once I got the other side of having that breakdown, I could see that a lot of the things that had driven their behaviours were their own fears and concerns about what had happened on their watch. And although it might sound, do you forgive people that do you harm? They didn't set out to do me harm. And actually, a lot of the harm I experienced, I did to myself. But equally, having that great sense of, I understand why they did what they did, and the concerns and fears that they had in their own positions enabled me to then have the ability to see beyond that and to put down that personal. And actually, it's quite freeing to be able to say, this isn't about you, it's about them. And that for me was a massive leadership lesson, that so often when you get feedback in situations, it's not about you, it's about them. So understanding that and being able to just step back and allow your ego to feel it. Yeah, I mean, you're not going to stop feeling it. It's still going to be painful, but to be able to put it down enables you to then focus on the real decisions, the things that you have to do to move forward, rather than being anchored in that pain and kept in the past.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for opening up about what happened to you. Is there anything you would share from that experience or after that experience that you think has really given you leadership, I guess, furtherance of your approach that's really set you up? Because it's obviously been it was a hugely trying time. So what is there anything you'd like to share in this conversation?
Oh gosh, there's loads I could share. How long have we got? So I think the experience profoundly changed me as a leader. It enabled me to start recognizing that people, act in ways because of what's going on for them, because I could see it in myself. But it also started me down a path of recognizing that there were approaches to leadership that just were toxic to you and toxic to the workforce, and perpetuating a system that doesn't really support us all, frankly. And the things that I picked up, particularly, if I use the word love, most people will run a mile, but that I know that I got through that situation because of the loving leadership of my chair, who was absolutely fantastic. And there were so many things that he shared with me during that period of time that put me back onto a path to recovery, but not just recovery, growth as a leader. Things like looking after yourself. It's not selfish to make sure you're all right. In fact, there's a reason why on the plane they tell you to put your oxygen mask on first, because you're no good to anyone passed out in the aisle. And that is something that time and time again you see leaders go, well, I've got this problem, I've got to dig deep, work longer hours, not go to the gym, not go out with my friends because I've got a report to write. And that slippery slope ends up with you doing 16 to 20 hour days, which is what I was doing and what caused me to burn out and fall off my perch. So that self-care was hugely important. Other things I like, I'm a great fan of something called applied improvisation. And a dear friend that I met through work introduced me to it. But there's a lovely phrase that I think is fantastic, and I've used so many times in leadership, which is let go, notice more, use everything.
I like that. I'm writing that down.
Yeah, it's fabulous. And it works in all situations. Noticing more. Just being, I'm not talking about looking for, images of Elvis in your toast or anything like that, not trying to see meaning in the meaningless, but actually also not writing off things that are coming in your direction as being meaningless. So, and I don't know if you cook, but not actually following the ingredients entirely, but being able to swap out things. I don't know what that is. but if you're like me, I mean, I tend to be somebody who adapts using what I've got. So using everything that's available to you is a really powerful leadership tool. Noticing what those things are is a first step in being able to use them, and letting go of things that don't serve you. And I mean things that don't serve you, whether that's staff or relationships or policies or systems, that courage to let go of stuff that isn't serving you. Yeah. So those are just two things. I mean, there's a million different things that I found. Another one that I use with my kids hate me for using this, but I use this in so many contexts, is Stephen Covey's Circles of Control and Influence. I love that. I use it all the time. The question, if you're in an overwhelmed situation, what can I control? What can I influence? And what can I neither control nor influence, but is concerning me, enables you to target your energy in a place that's actually going to move you forward rather than anchor you in that moment.
There's so many things that you're sharing, and we try and keep our podcast short, so this is going to be a real challenge for us. But I do want to just rewind a little bit, because I think if there's 2 or 3 strategies that make the biggest difference, you talked about loving leadership, which is not a turn of phrase that you often hear. You hear about tough love and you hear about all other forms. So tell me more about this chair and what made the biggest difference to you. Let's understand that a little bit more.
Yeah, so bless him, he's not with us anymore. Ian Theodorson, he used to be the CFO of the Church of England. And during my period of time, so to give you context, I was completely unable to talk to anyone for about 3 weeks. And it took me about 3.5 months to get back to work on a phased return. But for that 3 weeks, I'd say the first week or so, he literally spent every single day on the phone to me for several hours. And sometimes that would just be listening to me just sitting there blubbing down the line, not saying a word, just being present. And if I couldn't talk to him, he'd speak to my husband. So he was deeply present and deeply human and saw me. There was no judgment. It wasn't the time for him to say, what could we have done better? What could we have done differently? At that point in time, his primary concern was human to human. How do I help somebody who has quite clearly put everything on the line and has broken? How do I help them through this on a human level? So that was the first piece of it, was deeply feeling that this individual saw me as a human being, not as a member of staff to be managed. And that was so critical. I'm not saying in all circumstances you need that, but when somebody is so broken, I think there is, a place for digging into your HR policies and procedures, but there's also a place for just actually seeing the human being at the other end of the situation. So that was the first thing that he did. When I actually got to the point where I could start speaking and working through this, he had this phrase. He said to me, "Caron, are you filling up your bath?" And I thought, well, I'm having lots of baths, but I don't understand what you mean. He's like, no, this is a metaphor. This is a metaphor. So if you imagine your life as being you're sat in a bath, and the tap being switched on is the thing that fills you up and keeps you warm and keeps you surrounded by water, and the plug being pulled out is the stress. And the first thing that we do when we're stressed is we turn off the taps. We don't go to the yoga lesson. We don't go out down the pub with the mates. We don't do the things that look after ourselves. And believe me, you are very rapidly sitting on the bottom of a cold, empty bath, and it is not a pleasant place to be. So his phrase to me, fill up your bath, do the things that light you up, that make you feel in flow, give you the energy and the ability to move forward. Because if you don't, you're running on empty. So that was one of the phrases that Ian brought me into seeing. And then the final thing that he did is he put down his own vulnerabilities and concerns and ego to say what's right to do in this situation. And ultimately, as a pair, I was not just going off on a line of activity that hadn't been approved by the board. I was doing exactly what I'd been granted support and permission to do, and it wasn't going the way that I wanted it to. So he was able to just rally people around to say, look, we are the ones that jointly went down this route. And I know you're all scared, and I know it's not going the way we want it to, but this is not somebody going off and doing things all on their own. So we need to do this. We need to back this. We all got on the bus, and we now need to keep going forward. And if anybody doesn't want to be on the bus, that's fine. We can stop it and you can step off the bus, but the bus is going in this direction and we've got to have the courage of our convictions. He made me realize that people like to say that they're prepared to take risk, but they're not prepared to experience it. They're not prepared to experience failure. And that's a human thing. None of us want to actually fail and fail in a big and public way, but sometimes you do. So how do you deal with those moments? Because that's the bit that really shows your leadership. It's like the Rudyard Kipling poem, can you treat triumph and disaster the same? Because it's not about leadership can't guarantee success. No. Leadership can guarantee creativity or the ability to turn on a sixpence. We can do all of those things, but I don't have any control on the ultimate outcome. Sometimes, some of it is beyond our ability to dictate.
Yes. So that loving leadership, which thank you for sharing, because it's such a beautiful way of describing it. And I appreciate your digging into difficult things to do that. So thank you.
No, pleasure.
How have you taken that forward into, your current experiences? What do you do with the leaders around you to help them develop it?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is about demonstrating, so living it, showing. Because you can say all these things, you can read books, you can write down, little bullet point notes of how to do stuff. But if your words and your actions are not matching, then people see through it. So part of this has been about being deeply authentic. I am very vulnerable with those that I lead, and I don't mean that I pitch up and I wail and gnash my teeth and cry all the time. But if something's deeply affecting me, I'm happy to show it. I'm happy to say, I need to take a moment. That's painful, and I think people bounce back from really tricky situations when they feel that people have got them, that they are seen, they are understood, that the good and the bad is, you don't have to be perfect, that the good and the bad exists in all of us, even in the greatest of leaders. In fact, I'd say the most greatest leaders are flawed. We know that. You don't have to look at people like Churchill. You know that he was a deeply flawed individual, because we're all human beings. So it's showing up and consistently being what I say I am, but also in the moment when we are experiencing difficult situations, giving people permission to have a little rant and a kick around, because you need to let things go and then go, right, we've done that now. Now let's step back. What do we need to achieve? What are the things that we need to do? Do we understand what these individuals' drivers are? Are those drivers aligned with what the organisation's trying to achieve? Because if they're not, then we need to be having a different conversation with those individuals. So I think when I've used the word loving leadership in the past, people have tended to think that I'm talking about being soft and fluffy and gentle. But it's not. I think I am now equipped to lean into much harder situations, because I'm centering the human in front of me, and I'm not looking at it from the point of view of fear for my own position. I'm trying to see what's best for the organisation, what's best for the individuals, trying to chart a path through that in a way that is very honest and human, that is, yes, accepting of vulnerability and being clear about my own emotions, or the emotions of the person that I'm dealing with, but also rooting it in the business. What's acceptable, what's unacceptable. There have been many circumstances where I have had to go down the route of disciplining somebody, but they haven't felt kicked and bruised at the end of it. They haven't felt diminished by it, because I'm practicing what I preach, which is to see the human being, to recognise that we all make mistakes, and the important thing is that we learn from them and move forward, not that we are shamed or blamed for things.
No. In fact, normally I would end the podcast by asking you to maybe share a game-changing strategy from your experience, but I don't think we should. I think we should end where you've left it, which is putting the human at the heart of how you lead. Because I think that's a beautiful way of describing it. And actually, it's doing the things you just described. So we're going to end there, Caron, if that's okay. But I would like to say thank you so much. We've covered such a lot in the last 29 minutes. And so there's a lot to unpack here. So Caron Bradshaw OBE, thank you very much for joining the Best is Leadership podcast.
My pleasure.